Hi, and welcome to another edition of Studio 411. I'm Larry DeSilva, your host, and it's always a pleasure when we have a returning guest joining us with their latest project. Even better than that, we have a returning guest along with his co-author on his latest production, Robert J. Teitelbaum, who, of course, did a book not too long ago called Frogs and Snails and Mobster Tales. Which makes it easy too, because that's also the name of the website. But in addition, now his wife Carol has joined him in the new book that they have, a book called Hiding in Plain Sight. And we'll tell you a little bit about Robert. Robert actually is a Screen Actors Guild actor and a retired casting director with nearly 25 years in the entertainment industry. He also speaks at conferences, leads workshops on mob history, family dysfunction, trauma, abuse, addiction, and recovery. And as I said before, his first book, Frogs and Snails and Mobster Tales, Growing Up in Al Capone's Shadow, has helped many survivors find their voice. His lovely wife, Carol, joining us. She's been a psychotherapist since 1985, practices out in California, and bringing light into the darkness. Carol, along with her husband, Robert, have created a corporation called Creative Change Conferences, and these conferences celebrating over a decade of service, offering help to survivors of child abuse, and her program, It Happens to Boys, has also helped thousands of men dealing with the healing process that comes with abuse. That said, we'll delve into the book Hiding in Plain Sight, which is a personal window into organized crime in the 20s all the way through the 50s and perhaps even beyond. So welcoming back to Studio 411, Robert Teitelbaum. Robert, welcome back. Carol, welcome for the first time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, obviously, when we had Robert on before to talk about the other book, which really dealt with your years growing up from a young boy, we dealt with quite a list of heavy-duty issues here. Again, what was the idea then to do what in effect is a prequel to that certainly spine-bending chapter of your life? What was the motivation, shall we say, as if we needed one?
Basically, it was my parents' story. They used to come over and see us all the time, even though that they were separated and divorced after a while. But they kept telling us the same stories over and over again at different times. And the stories would be the same stories that my father would tell, and then a couple months later my mother would tell a different story, and then my father would come back and see us again, and it'd be the same story again. And it was so many years that we had these stories. And we're married now 54 years, going to be 55 in September. The situation is that we know these stories and we knew them well, so we wrote it down. I would write it by day, Carol would edit at night, and we had a good relationship, and we wrote a good book.
So it was one of those cases where really the book over a long period of time, the prequel follow-up really almost wrote itself without too much other energies having to be put in.
Right.
Yeah, very good.
It's a lot of fun to tell Robert's mother's story because we always focused on his father. But really, it's his mother's story about her becoming an attorney way back in the early 20s. Not very many women were attorneys back then. And her fall from grace, her husband, was really her kryptonite.
Indeed. And again, I don't want to give too much of it away. What I found, and we'll touch a little bit upon it later, again, the observations of mine were that there were things that maybe I didn't pick up by reading the first book when Robert and I spoke about. That then I thought, wait a minute, I said, is this like leading me in a different directions with some of the, real life subplots that were going on? So we'll try to cover some of those. Give me an idea, again, just for the viewers. Tell me about your parents, Robert, and again, obviously we're going to talk about their early years, but basically in a nutshell, for someone walking into the room, what did your parents do and who did they do it for?
You see, they were were attorneys. They started off with my Uncle Ben, who was working for Big Jim Colosimo. Then Johnny Torrio, after Colosimo was murdered by Torrio, and it was kind of convoluted back then. But then the situation was Al Capone was brought in by Johnny Torrio. Capone hired my Uncle Ben as the attorney. My mother and father, when they graduated, went with Uncle Ben. Uncle Ben lost $1,000 and ran away to Canada, and my father and mother wound up in 1928 being Al Capone and his whole family's attorney.
Interesting. And again, there is just a laundry list of people from basically the late 20s, early 30s until the mid to late 50s. Of people that your parents had business dealings with, again, for film studios, Jimmy Durante. I mean, I saw people on there that, entertainers, obviously people that were involved in various activities, legal or otherwise, just, a laundry list of people that just, was amazing. I thought I was like, picturing all these people at a reunion somewhere, either up there or down here. I'm not quite sure, but it would be quite a party for sure.
And they were all connected to a Teitelbaum.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Robert, what did that upbringing, teach you growing up? And you talked a little bit about, I think, the last time you were on also. What handicaps did it cause you as an adult later on? So the pros and the cons.
As an adult, it made me think that I was invincible, that I could do whatever I wanted, that, I'm very fortunate that Carol is still with me and putting up with me after all these years because of just the problems that I had from my childhood, because starting when I was like 4 years old, I'll digress just a little bit, I was told never to talk about any of my parents' clients. And then by the time I went into school, all my brothers and sisters had told everybody everything. Yes. So I walked in, everybody knew that my parents were mob lawyers. In fact, when we moved to Indio, in the newspaper, it said that my mother was Al Capone's sister, which was BS. It was kind of funny that came off that way. We always kind of laughed about it after all those years. But it did affect me, and I think I'm a lot better now.
I guess your siblings missed the memo, not to discuss those things in school.
Right.
That's exactly correct.
Yeah.
And everybody talked about it. We were the only one in town that had the biggest house. We had a 3-acre compound with 11-foot high walls. We had an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Everybody later on started coming over and swimming at the house, and it was just, it was great. I thought those 11-foot high walls were to keep people out, but it was really to keep me in.
Now, Carol, you got the impression, insisted that Robert really write this book, this prequel to the original book. And you lent your assistant to it as well to see it come together. Tell me from your angle again, obviously what you've dealt with all these years being with Robert, and also, when it came to putting these books together, again, where did you kind of feel your expertise fit in here to help him put this project out?
Well, Robert's mother and I were very close, and she told me things that she didn't even tell her daughters. And so I thought it was time that those stories got told. I always ask her to write a book and talk about her life because it was fascinating, and people are in love with mob stories. They still are. They romanticize the mob. And I wanted to have real stories be told of relationships between those people, because she really wanted to do good. She really wanted to be a good attorney who would help people and help the downtrodden. And through twists of fate, she ended up representing the mob. And she had to find a way to make it right. so she realized they were also fathers and brothers and sons. And so she was representing the humanness of those people and not looking at so much of what they did. And that's very similar to Robert and I always saw his good heart. So even though he acted out and he did drugs and alcohol, I always saw that heart underneath it all. And I knew that at some point he would heal and be the man that I thought I was marrying.
There you go. Good lady, Robert. Good lady.
I know.
Our guests, Robert and Carol Teitelbaum, the book Hiding in Plain Sight. For more information, Frogs and Snails and MobsterTales.com, published by Teitelbaum Publications. So again, congratulations. You guys now are in the publishing business, so that'll certainly keep you busy while you're pursuing other projects as well. A couple of things. I was fascinated by this comment here. I'm going to read it. First of all, your grandmother and her family came over, got off the boat at Ellis Island, correct?
That is good.
Okay. This was what, around like the turn of the 20th century, around 1903, correct?
That was 1903. The rest of the family started coming over starting in 1850.
Oh, wow. Okay. So
1903, the last group, all the way down to fifth cousins out of Europe and out of harm's way.
the quote that I found very interesting, given the the times that we currently live in, and I'm quoting directly from the book. The area was one of those places. This is again in Chicago's North Side, but it could have been anywhere in the U.S., especially big cities. The area was one of those places where immigrants, especially Jewish, Italian, and Irish, settled. As he turned the page, all three groups were considered by, quote, polite, unquote, Chicago society to be untrusty, unworthy rather, lazy, dirty, and downright disgusting scum coming to take work away from, quote, real Americans. Isn't that interesting? Except for the type of ethnicities that were mentioned, I almost thought you were writing about today.
I
know. So my question to you is again, we know what's going on in today's society, but however, who are the people that were here? All I could think of would be like, a Puritan or white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Who are the ones that were so fearful of these Poles, Italians, and Jews? I'm just curious to educate me on that.
They weren't speaking English, so they weren't trustworthy when they started speaking in their own language. Nobody knew what they were saying, and they didn't trust them. And they were also coming to take jobs away from the people who had few jobs.
Right, so, but I'm saying who are those people that were fearful? In other words, where did they come from? Because unless my history lessons have been bad, everybody came from somewhere.
The same places, only earlier.
They weren't Native Americans.
Well, yeah, I figured, the guy in front of the cigar store might have been upset that someone was going to take his post. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So I found that very interesting. So without even realizing it, you stirred that up in me when I said that. I said, I have to ask them. I said, who are these people that were so upset? And then I'll take it one step further. I recall in my younger days, people talking about as late as the 30s, how when it came to, we'll say, Italians, people, they were more accepting when they heard, well, Joe DiMaggio, Frank Sinatra. But exactly with these three ethnicities, when did all of a sudden they start to become accepted? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Because obviously they were being called some terrible things back in those early days.
When they started taking money
yes.
and throwing money around, they started being acceptable.
Very good. Good answer. All right. So
to their families.
Let's turn to your mom. Your mom, Esther, was a unique woman for her time. Actually, I think she was ahead of her time, to be honest with you.
Very ahead of her time.
She was even a boxer.
Yes, I know. We have a shot of her doing her. Was it the right word? Pugilistic prowess there? Yeah, that's right.
Yes. And she was really good. She ended her career 16-0.
She was quite
overhand right.
Yeah. She could have. I thought of her fighting Rocky Marciano the way she could handle herself. And there was a couple of stories in the book where I think she had an altercation with a lady that I think knew a few things about what her husband was doing, and I think she nearly took that individual out, if I recall.
She did.
Yeah, she did. She didn't take anything. It made her very angry, and she let it out. Unfortunately, Rose got hurt.
Now, one of the first things in reading this book, the prequel, of course, to Frogs and Snails and Mobster Tales, which was the first book that Robert co-wrote. Again, your mom, of course, being a lawyer, she was kind of the, not the brains, whatever, but she was the researcher, whatever. And your dad, because he had this photographic memory, they really were quite a tandem. You know, she did the legwork, he did the actual court appearances, etc. But having children, no offense to Robert and his siblings, even in today's standards, I got the impression that maybe she would never say it, but that this really was a setback for her, not only in terms of career. Not that she didn't love her children, but I really think that the number that came along, I really think was something that she had a hard time dealing with.
Well,
The only reason she had children is because Robert's father was very good at debriefing.
Yes, okay. Okay.
well,
Obviously a legal term for something else, but Google debriefing, yeah.
Well, they were actually living together since 1924, and they never got married till 32, never had started having children until 38. And the real truth of it is I always thought that my mom didn't want kids. And then when she did start having kids, and she had 5 very quickly, from 39 to 45, and then in 37, she had another baby girl, and my little sister Linda, she died when she was 13 months old. And at this time, my mom had thrown herself into her children, and she loved the kids, and she showed affection. But after my little sister died, it kind of it killed her spirit, and she didn't. She walked into her room and kind of stayed there for many years until my wife got her out.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more there, because there again some things that I didn't pick up perhaps in the first book that all of a sudden made a little more sense to me. And it wasn't that you didn't explain it properly. It's just that, like any book, sometimes we miss the little, veiled references to something. But this kind of then got me thinking, wait a minute, maybe this is why all this happened. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Robert and Carol Teitelbaum joining us. The book Hiding in Plain Sight, a personal window into organized crime from the 1920s through the 1950s. And speaking of that, again, to me, isn't there still organized crime? I mean, maybe not so much in this country, or is it just changed names?
In every culture.
And Hoover said there wasn't a mafia.
Oh, okay. And I'm sorry, Herbert Hoover? Well, now we know why he lost the election. Okay, so here we go. There we go. Let me ask you this. Now, would organized crime in big cities like Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, during those time frames and even later, to name a couple of cities, why did they begin flourishing in the 1920s? We grew up reading history, assuming that a lot of it had to do with Prohibition, but really wasn't that already going on even before Prohibition was enacted in the late teens, early 20s?
Yes, it was the Black Hand that was causing a lot of grief back then, because either you did what they said or they killed you. And that was wiped out by Johnny Torrio in 1925 when he came to Chicago. That stopped. So, there was always crime. My 2 uncles, back when they were still in Poland, they were still causing trouble, and they were always getting in trouble. And when they got here, the first thing they did is they hooked up with Big Jim Colosimo, and they were his fire starters for the insurance scams that went on. And later on, when Coliseum, they got 20 years in jail. They were given 20 years, and they never spent a day in jail.
Those are the two that I saw an article, right? They were on the lam up to Canada, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, nice. And that little side trip up to the great northwest or whatever.
And the mafia was involved with the unions, and they were controlling the unions.
Yeah.
I was
actually the photography union, the motion picture union, that was started in New York. Though my uncle Felix went there to help start that. So it was things that was already in the family way back when.
I was shocked about the one with the unions in Hollywood. I'll tell you, that reminds me of a great documentary I saw not too long ago. The Walt Disney Company, their people went out on strike on at least of a couple of occasions, and of course Walt, was a guy that was kind of in his own little world, and he really took it out on several people. And now, of course, knowing this, I'm thinking, well, he's lucky he didn't, cross too many people. Otherwise, Mickey would have been without a daddy, I think.
Yes, I think so.
True. But in '39, Ben Siegel started the Screen Extras Guild, which my father helped him with, and that was because they couldn't get enough extras for Gone with the Wind. And they opened up the guild, made it a 5,000-person cap, and then they would only let in people that were hiding in plain sight, so to speak, by coming from New York. Because it was too hot in New York, they went to Chicago. When things got too hot for these people, they were just sent to Hollywood to be extras, not because they needed the money, but because of they could go there and do get the connections and funnel information up to Ben and also to Mickey Cohen. Mickey was a little nasty guy, but he was okay. I was at his home 3 or 4 times with my father in the early 50s.
Wow. Now, let's talk about going back to those early 20s, how your mom, Esther, and your father, Abraham, a.k.a. Abe, how they met.
My mom was in her second year of college and at John Marshall Law School, and she was at home, and someone knocked on the door, and she opened up the window, and it was my father. And Ben Siegel had made arrangements with my uncle Ben Melnick that my pop would be able to come there and stay while he goes to John Marshall Law School.
Even though they already had 10 children?
Yeah,
wow.
So he wound up staying there. I mean, it was, and my mom and him, they got together really quick.
It's a lot of debriefing going on in this family, let me tell you. Now, I have to ask, because things Robert is saying to me all of a sudden trigger these questions. Carol, because obviously you had the opportunity to know both parents before they passed. What traits, I'll let you tell me which ones, and that doesn't have to be good or all bad, whatever. What traits do you see in Robert? Do you see more of his mom, or do you see his dad, or a mix? And I don't mean physically, just, overall.
More of his dad.
I'm sorry?
More of his dad.
More of his dad, yeah.
The charming storyteller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a real charmer, eh?
Real charmer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, been falling all over him.
Yeah, there you go.
And I don't partake, though.
No.
Yes, I know. I'll tell you, again, it was just amazing the stuff that was in this book, and obviously, understandably, because of the fact that the other book dealt with, a time in your life when you and your siblings were, in effect, banished out to California. A nice place to live, in a sense. Although, wasn't it Eleanor Roosevelt that said it was too darn hot to live out there?
Yes.
Damn hot.
Right.
Damn hot, yeah. And because the place where you lived originally was supposed to be a retirement home for Franklin Roosevelt, our late president.
Exactly correct. He died before he took possession. Eleanor decided to come out and spend the summer. She was there exactly 3 or 4 days, and she said it was too damn hot, and she went back to Valkill, Hyde Park, and her 2 sons went up to Sacramento and became politicians.
There you go. 1927, your mom goes to work at her Uncle Ben's law firm, with your dad joining shortly after, because they both graduated, I believe, around the same time. Did she ever regret joining the family business? Because from what I read, on one hand, it was a great opportunity that she wouldn't have gotten anywhere else because she would have started way at the bottom, but did it also come with certain negative caveats attached to it?
Well, her mother started pushing her to join Uncle Ben's law firm way before she finished college. And she said his clients have a lot of money, and Uncle Ben has alligator shoes and a nice valise. So you will always make money if you work for Uncle Ben. And she said, I don't want to, because she already knew the history of what Uncle Ben was involved in. But through lots of prodding from Grandma, and promised to put her new boyfriend's name on the shingle, she finally gave in.
Yeah.
Now, that was impressive, too, was that your dad actually wound up getting his name on the, as you call it, shingle of the law firm, barely joining the firm itself.
Yes.
And my mom's second case, she took to the Supreme Court. And she won her, she won all her cases until about 1946. She didn't win the Capone case because they weren't Capone's lawyers for tax. That was Hearn, Mattingly, and Fink. And that really screwed it up. And Capone got 12 years. My parents did promise him they would get him out early, and they did. In fact, he didn't go into prison until the end of 32, early 33, and they got him out in 39. And in the back of the book, I put the Foley, and it's the Freedom of Information Act, and I put a picture of the telegram that got Capone out of jail.
Now, we have a shot of Al Capone talking about notoriety, you know, on the cover of Time magazine. Pretty impressive stuff, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how many mobsters or maybe politicians today in Time magazine, but then again, you could flip a coin and almost hard to tell one from another these days. But.
Which is which? Who's who?
Yeah, who's who exactly? But yeah, we have that Time magazine shot of Al Capone. It's pretty good stuff. Pretty good.
Which one? Which picture is that? Is that the one in taking a lie detector test?
No. This is like a caricature of Al from the 1930s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and then there was one I think that we talked about last time. Wasn't your dad on the cover of Life magazine?
Yes.
Yeah.
Taking a lie detector test.
In later years, his dealings with Robert Kennedy that we'll talk about a little later. Let's talk about authors. Yeah, okay. I don't know if they were authors. They were certainly mobsters. Ben Bugsy Siegel and Al Capone. You knew them both. You told the famous story about the cufflinks that were given to you when you were first born.
Yes.
That you were kind enough to share with us. Ben Siegel was, if I got correct, was a childhood friend of your dad's, correct?
That is correct.
Tell me about those two individuals. Give us a little synopsis for the viewer, maybe who's heard the names but doesn't know them. Were they alike? Were they different? You know, tell us about their characteristics.
Very different. My father always said that Capone was the most honorable man he ever met, because if he said he was going to kill you, he would. It's very hard. Yes, it was very tough to describe them. As far as Ben Siegel goes, I was just a child running around, and I was told, I was a couple years old, and my family, my kids, my brothers and sisters were dragging me around, and we were just running around, and Ben was there, and he was with other people. And he was always nice to us and kind, and he never had anything to get away from us kids or anything like that. But Capone, he was out of jail. He died in 47. I was born in 45. In 45, he was already out of jail. He was out 38, 39. He came to our house for dinner 3 months after I was born, and he gave me those cufflinks. I think you have a picture of them. And it was kind of a strange initiation fee, which would be one of the boys later on. And it was to me, I look at it now and I think that's one of the worst things anybody could ever have given a child. A pair of 38 solid gold cufflinks that the cylinders turn. You could turn it sideways and see where the bullets would go because it turned, and pearl handles. I mean, it was terrible. I only wore them twice. I wore them once when I was about 5 years old at a party, and then the last time I wore them was in November 14th of 2015 at the Annenberg when I unveiled the Frogs and Snails. And I wore them there, and everybody was oohed and awed, and I put them away, and I've never shown them again.
Well, if you ever go to an NRA convention, you can wear those, and you might get in for free. So that might be the only other place I could think of. But I appreciate you sharing that story, as well as when you were on with us before, a lovely photograph of that. The detail that went into those things, let me tell you, that was pretty impressive. Pretty impressive. Again, I love that. I remember the day Robert told me, I've got a picture you've got to use on the first taping that he did with us. And when he sent me those cufflinks, I couldn't believe it. I just marveled at that. You got to have those appraised. Those got to be worth a little bit.
Yeah.
Just for the gold alone. I mean.
He wrote a poem about a year ago, and it sold, not a year ago, but it went up to auction about a year ago. I think it went for $38,000 or $39,000.
Now, as you said, Capone eventually did go to prison. Despite, from what I saw in the book, your mom's advice as part of his legal counsel. Tell a little bit about that, because had he listened to her, he might have been spared the time, or might have done considerably less.
Yeah, my mom pleaded with him to get a 30 days extension rather than going directly to court. And she told him that she would find the loophole, because she always did find the loopholes. And he got upset, and even his brother Ralph tried to talk him out of it and to go with my mother and father, because my mother could have found precedents to get the whole case thrown out. Remember, he didn't go to jail for murder. He went to jail for tax evasion. And what happened was Mattingly was sent to go try to work with the courts and the DAs, and he showed up. And he showed up with the judge and also the district attorney. And they asked Mattingly, well, what would Mr. Capone want? What would he agree to? And Mattingly and Capone went off to the jury room and sat there for an hour, and he penned a foolish note and offering that he would plead guilty to get a couple of years and just nothing special, because no one had ever gone to jail for more than 18 months for tax evasion. So Mattingly thought he could do this, and it was basically used against him. And then when they found out that somebody had been passing around $1,000 bills to the six of the jury, that's when they switched the jury, and Capone got nailed.
There you go.
Go
ahead.
So he told my mother, he says, I wish I would have listened to you.
Esther knew, no doubt. We have a photo of the law offices, the building that your family, along with Mr. Melnick, owned on Michigan Avenue, I believe, in Chicago. Quite an impressive building for sure. What I love is that it had a private stairwell leading to the 10th floor. So I assume a lot of the boys used to take that private stairwell, correct?
Yeah. Right.
I wouldn't want to walk 10 floors up being over 200 pounds.
Well, again, you have to make sacrifices if you want to keep breathing sometimes, you know what I mean? Robert and Carol Teitelbaum joining us for the hour here on Studio 411. The book Hiding in Plain Sight, published by Teitelbaum Publications. For more information, frogsandsnailsandmobstertales.com. Say that 3 times. All right. Now, Carol, Abe's family, and I'm curious if she talked to you about this, did not necessarily care for Esther, as a potential bride for A back in the day. Now, why was that? What about her? She seemed like a lovely woman.
He didn't want us to be with anyone.
Oh, he didn't want his boy to be married.
Let them to themselves.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So every time we would see his sister, she would say, this is in later years, is your mother-in-law still alive? And I'd say, yes, she is. She'd go, ah. And that was something she did all the way until she died. Is she still alive? So they never made peace. Until his funeral, then they made peace.
Oh, okay. And apparently, I would say of the two, Esther was, on a scale of 1 to 10, was more smitten with A, because there's a great story about a proposal and a pastrami sandwich. So that's pretty good. So very, very good. And he was kind of, men are usually like that. We don't see signals sometimes. So you had to be kind of like, pushed, into finally popping the question. But good thing he came through there in the end. My goodness. Let's see now. 1939. Your folks get Al Capone released early after 7 years, 4 months in prison. How did that happen? Was it for good behavior, or?
My father was able to pay all the fines that there was, and the government was satisfied with that. He was sick. People said that he was crazy with syphilis and everything, but if you look at pictures of him after that, it wasn't until the middle of, not the middle, like 43, 44, 45, when he started to succumb to that disease. But back when he got out, he was crystal clear. And he did go to different hospitals, and he had different doctors that took care of him for many years.
I found the list. I was trying to read off a few of the names. These were the known associates and clients of Esther and Abraham, again, between the years 1928 and 1960. Again, Benjamin Siegel, Teresa Capone, Al Capone, as we mentioned, Moses Annenberg, the Los Angeles Teamsters Union, Jimmy Durante, the Sands Hotel, Riviera Hotel, Gene Autry, Mr. Christmas himself. Gene Autry was a client. Meyer Lansky, the Desert Inn, the Ramada Inn. My God, I'll never stay at another Ramada without thinking of this. Jimmy Fradiano, Mickey Cohen. Again, it's just MGM, Lucky Luciano, Joe Pasternak, who was a big Hollywood type back in the Paramount Studios, Universal Studios, Columbia Studios, Steinway Drugs, my God, I mean, Chicago Candy Association. I mean, it's just the restaurants, hotels. I mean, they're just incredible, the clientele that they had.
You missed the attorney, Sidney Korchak, who brought the mob into Las Vegas and made it legal. It made everything that they do legal starting in the early 60s. And Korchak, my father was his mentor. He showed him how to basically take the mob's money and put it into legal ventures.
Okay.
And Sidney Korchak, there's another great book that puts a whole chapter on how my father mentored Korchak, and how Korchak took over the flag of making things legal for the mob.
Now, when we had you on the last time, we talked about, of course, where you grew up in the Palm Springs area and the home there, the Loveless Ranch, and then, of course, later on moved from there. And again, I thought in those days, it was because, things were getting a little hot and bothered in Chicago and New York. But again, reading this book, and tell me if I'm totally off base here, I got the impression that the move was really probably to kind of get this family almost kind of out of the picture. Yeah, they might be safe because your dad began this second relationship with another family. Again, more debriefing going on. And so am I onto something here, or is this just total coincidence?
You're hitting
you're batting 1,000.
Okay, very good, very good.
But The other woman was a friend of my mother's. My mother had 7 sisters, and the youngest 2 brought this other lady into the family.
She wasn't a lady.
Okay. Young. She was very young at the time, 18 years old. She was in the family home in Chicago on Hawthorne Place for Christmas, and they were the girls were playing a game. What would you want if you could have any wish that you wanted? And everybody wanted this and that and this and that. My Aunt Naomi wanted a fur coat and a new car and a new home. But when it got down to her, she stood up and she pointed at the kitchen at my mother and father standing there, and I was there. My mother was holding me, and this is what my aunts, several of my aunts told me. So this story comes right from the family. That she asked, she said, "This is what I want," and my other aunt asked, "Why? What do you mean? You want this? You want a family? You want a family of your own, a nice home? You want this and that?" She says, "No, this is what I want," and this is what she finally got.
Wow, amazing. So again, that was something that I don't know if other people in book shows or autograph sessions and other interviews you've done have come up with this. But then reading this book, I'm like, wait a minute, did I miss some of this during the first book? Because this is what I suspected was going on. And again, Carol, now why did Esther, Robert's mom, when did she possibly suspect, and why did she even tolerate it the length of time that she did?
Well, she knew that he was seeing other women way back when she beat up the madam. So she said, "I'll look the other way as long as you don't tell me about it and come home to me." So she wanted that relationship, and that was really important to her. Not only the love relationship, but the partnership. She wanted to keep that partnership alive because she knew they were really good partners together.
Really?
And she was madly in love with him, almost when she died.
Now, were they on speaking terms? In other words, when your dad first passed before your mom, or was it kind of like he shows up, she shows up, that kind of thing?
Well, they didn't come places together, but if they happened to be somewhere like our wedding, they spoke to each other, and they were civil to each other. And she didn't really say any bad things about him, except for the fact that he was a bigamist.
Yes. Oh, well. And now, Robert,
why don't you get a divorce? And she said, "No, it's not safe to do that." So she didn't get a divorce until I pushed her into it in 1964, and she finally got a divorce.
And interesting, because around that time was when she kind of resurrected her career and then got going. So that it's interesting, though. Is that, again, a coincidence, or is that something that maybe was a coming of age to realize that, hey, you've got a lot to offer? Now, did she ever never got remarried? Any suitors? No, she just started wearing black like a lot of the folks from the old country do. And
she didn't do that, but she had a life, and she had a lot of outings with her sisters, and they did a lot together. But when I was pregnant with my daughter, and I didn't want to lose my job as a legal secretary, I talked her into taking my job. And then, of course, as soon as she got there, they knew the quality of lawyer they had there, and they said, "You can't be a legal secretary," and they pushed her off to a law firm, and she went back to work. So that was really a wonderful thing that happened, and she gained her self-respect again and her self-esteem, and she was somebody that all the attorneys came to because she had a degree to do the Supreme Court, and none of them did.
Wow.
So she's a licensed practice in the Supreme Court. Yeah. And none of the attorneys did, so everybody came to her for advice.
I used to go to Westwood and see 7 to 10 attorneys waiting in line to see my mom, and because they were having trouble with their cases, and my mom would sit down and go over it and do the research, and she was a 95%er. That's why they kept her until she was 89 years old.
Wow.
She stopped. And when she did, if she wouldn't have stopped, she'd be 119 today and still working at Westwood.
Right.
So your dad eventually passed, what was it, 1980, am I correct?
Yes.
1990, and so then at that point your mom was still working.
Yeah, she was
Oh,
still
yeah.
working.
Yeah, she was. It was. I asked her. I said, "How come you're still working?" She said, "The car keeps showing up."
Now, backing up a couple of decades from that uplifting, positive story, which was great. June 47, your father's childhood friend, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, we have a photo of Bugsy, was shot dead in Beverly Hills. Now, he had gotten involved, too, with all the Vegas kind of activity that was going on, turning in the state of Nevada into what it is today. Again, your father must have taken that pretty badly.
Well, he did. My father and Alan Smiley were good friends, and Alan Smiley was Ben Siegel's best friend. My father tried to talk Ben out of going to Las Vegas in the first place, but Ben was very hard-headed about it, and he wanted to go, and besides that, Meyer asked him to go. And so he was obligated, and he went to Vegas, and he spent more money than he had, even his own money, so he had to borrow more money. And in essence, that one little hotel probably made 1,000 times more than the money that he was killed for.
Now, your parents, as you discussed, separated, and eventually, with Carol's urging, sought a divorce. Did obviously in the conversation in the remaining 2.5 decades with your dad, I would assume probably not so much with Carol, but did he ever open up about some of this stuff, or did you kind of not hear from his end of the story?
I heard all of it.
Okay, so
when I was 14, I saw a terrible thing. My father made a deal to buy a market on Beverly Drive in Beverly Hills, and he paid $150,000 for it. My brother had just graduated college, and he had a friend that got a big settlement, not a settlement, but a lot of money from his parents. And my father let him be a third partner for $150,000. And at the same time, he called the milk company, told him he was going to throw them out, and he got another milk company to come in and pay him $150,000 again for changing the milk. This is a human thing. And it's about a year and a half later, my father took me and this young man to Nate and Al's, and we had lunch together. And my father pulled out a contract and a certified check for $25,000. He said, "Here, I'm buying you out." He says, "For $25,000? How can?" And he was turning white. He said, "Listen, if you do not take this deal, you'll be dead by noon." And then my father tells me, he says, "Get up, let's go. It's time to go." And then he stops and he hands the check to the young man, and he says, "It's your turn to pay." And he walks out. And when we walked outside, he turned to me. He says, "Now you know how things work, and I'll never ever have to worry about you." And I'll tell you something. That was the last time I worked with my father. I since I was a journeyman clerk already, even though I was young, I went to another market and went to work, and until I went in the Marine Corps, and that was the end of my marketing days. But no, I was very upset with my father over that.
I'm making a note: never go to lunch with Robert, where someone has to pick up the check. I'll make sure Carol is there at all times. Now, your dad, of course, another topic that always seems to run through history. Your dad wound up doing some jail time as well for tax evasion. It's funny how these things, they never get people for certain crimes, but it's always they always find a way to get you for tax this or tax that. The same that goes on back in the day today seems to be prevalent again today. So your dad went to prison for how long, if at all?
Less than 3 years.
Okay.
He got 6 months to life.
He began the 6 month to life. It wasn't for tax evasion. It was for stealing money from. This is something he didn't do. He sold 15,000 lots in Morro Bay in Northern California, and he got a very large commission. When a commission check for the broker came to the house, somebody signed it and cashed it and went to Europe. And it wasn't my father. And my father gets arrested for it because he didn't want the kids, because there were 5 other kids there. He didn't want these kids to not have somebody there, a mother, which, what can I say? But he went to jail, and it was for something he didn't do. And let me tell you this. My father could have gone to jail for a lot of other things, but this was really not something that he did.
But that's my point, is that usually people that wind up going to jail, especially high profile, it's usually always something, they're gonna dog you until they find something, whether it's 100% or whatever, you're gonna do some time, and we're witnessing that in some ways, like what goes around comes around. Interesting stat in the remaining moments we have with Robert and Carol Teitelbaum, the book Hiding in Plain Sight. For more information, Frogs and Snails and MobsterTales.com, published by Teitelbaum Publishing. Read an interesting article recently that was talking about, going back to the days of the 30s, 40s, 50s, for instance. Is crime, especially in the big cities, because in those days it was mob crime, is it any less today? And the so-called experts said it's just a different kind of crime, because now you have these gangs like your MS-13 and others that are pervasive throughout the country as well as the world. So his point was that it was not that it was more then, it's just pretty much the same now. It's just that it's cloaked under different methods. Now everything is more sophisticated because of technology and different styles, different strokes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep. I stumped them with that. I thought I was going to get a long answer, but I did.
No, it's true. And so many young people are getting involved because they don't have any boundaries or limits at home, and here you get in a gang, there's lots of boundaries and limits, and they tell you exactly what to do, and you just follow orders.
Well, like look in Chicago. Look in Chicago again with the, again, it's the murder rate, but again, it's got to be caused by something. In Chicago, if we looked up statistics, you almost could say that the crime and the murder rate that's going on in a city like Chicago, the Windy City, a very respected city, is probably higher than at any time when all these people that we talked about, the Lanskys, the Siegels, the Capones, were in power.
Because they were in control. Yeah. And if they were in control, you dare do something like that on their territory.
And some of the initiations to be in gangs is to murder 3 people that you don't know. And so they don't even think about it, that people even have families or their brothers or sisters to someone. Yeah. That's just like playing a video game. You just shoot them, and that's the end of it.
Now, in the remaining couple of moments, some short answers, if I may ask. Esther, again, Carol, how would you sum up, in other words, those remaining years? Did she look, in your words, did she look back at her life? Was she satisfied? Did she have regrets? Maybe some things that she wished she had done that she didn't do? How was she at the end of her life?
Well, people would always say that they wish she didn't live alone, but when I talked to her, she said, I always had somebody around. There was 10 brothers and sisters, and your father-in-law always insisted that the family come to Indio to stay with us. So every summer, I had family there. I never had any time by myself. So now that I live alone, I'm very happy to be alone.
There you go.
She, had her sisters come for lunch bunch, and she had her children and grandchildren, and she was always reading. She always had a book that she was reading, and she always kept studying things. So she was pretty content.
And of course, because she had her kind of second act as far as her career, that really was something that a lot of people our ages and much older don't have to kind of, balance the, balance things out a little bit.
And she actually got an award, Robert, with her to the Four Seasons Hotel. She was escorted by the Secret Service, and she got an award for being one of the early graduates of John Marshall Law School as a woman attorney. And so she was very thrilled about that.
She died about 6 months later at 90.
Very good. Well, not good there, but I'm saying good to hear about the great stuff that happened to Robert's mom in later years.
In later years, Uncle Ben came back, and she took him back.
Yes, I know. Yeah, to be continued. More Uncle Ben, not to be confused with the rice mogul. This is Uncle Ben, the lawyer. Hiding in plain sight, I'm reading a quote, is more than the history of a quirky family. This well-written, highly engaging, humorous account of felons, lawyers, and secret keepers is a slice of Americana. I highly recommend this fast-paced prequel. A quote from John Lee, therapist and best-selling author of The Flying Boy, Healing the Wounded Man. And on that note, we would like to thank our guests for joining us today, Robert and Carol Teitelbaum. The book Hiding in Plain Sight. For more information, frogsandsailsandmobstertales.com, published by Teitelbaum Publications. And again, it's been a joy having you both here. I'm glad I saw through some of those earlier things that I didn't get the last time. So look forward to more stuff from you, and we look forward to having both of you back on Studio 411 in the near future. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, hang on a second, and we thank you for tuning in and welcoming us into your living room or whatever mechanism you use to watch Studio 411. Larry DeSilva is my name. We look forward to seeing you again, and we thank you for taking time out to watch the program. Take care.